bed for a week, so I appreciate you all joining me and singing it. Last Sunday night we were blessed to lead a Vesper service at the Rocky Mountain National Park in honor of their centennial, their 100-year celebration as a park. And as we read and heard this Psalm 8 read aloud, I kept singing that song in my heart all week. I don't know if you know that feeling when something that you read, something that you see on television, something that someone says to you gets kind of stuck on repeat, like a bee in your bonnet, and it just keeps going on and on. I know when that happens to me, I try to lean into that curiosity. And as a pastor, I've made a commitment that if I can preach about it, maybe I'll figure it out, what it is that the Spirit's trying to tell me and what I'm supposed to do about it. So I've also had a few other bees in my bonnet for the past few months. Some of you may remember that I was invited to Washington, D.C. in January to a Young Clergy Leadership Forum sponsored by the United Methodist Church's General Board of Church and Society. And I heard about some things then that have been on my mind ever since, that have been bees in my bonnet. Some of them were child trafficking, sex trafficking, or the sacred worth of women and girls and how we treat our young people in today's world. Some of these thoughts keep coming up in conversations and articles I read, and so I finally give up, and I am going to preach for the next 6 weeks about something that I was introduced to at that forum called the Social Principles of the United Methodist Church. Now, I don't know how many of you are Methodist or how many of you have ever heard of this document, but it has a pretty long and strong history in our church. Back in 1908, there was a social creed written about how we as Christians can be in the world. And every 4 years since then, there have been rewrites, additions, and corrections to this document right alongside our Book of Discipline, which is the document that governs our political church and how we're organized. Now, I've ordered some extra copies of this book that should arrive this week, so if anybody else wants to read in detail what the United Methodists say about some pretty racy topics like the natural world or the nurturing community of family, sexuality, politics, economics, it's going to get pretty hot and heavy here in the next 6 weeks, so I hope you'll stick with me. But I can make you one promise. I will not attempt to tell you what to believe. And I don't think that that's the purpose of this book either. This book is to share what some faithful Christians have composed and have agreed upon about what they believe. But of course, the United Methodist Church is a big umbrella with a lot of different beliefs and experiences underneath it. And so as we move into a discussion, I hope this fuels discussions among us about who we are and what we're called to do. And I hope we get to know one another better. I'd just like to invite us to use Wesley's quote that you find, oh, not in your bulletin, that was for next week, sorry. Wesley said that when we disagree, may we not love alike, because only love can beget love. So even in our disagreements or in our discussions, I would invite you to discuss openly how you feel about these topics, but to remember a sense of love and unity which underlies and undergirds our conversation. I also want to tell you that United Methodists have a strong tradition in social reform. And next summer, our global church will meet in Portland, Oregon, once again, to discuss this Book of Discipline and these social principles. And as we continue to define ourselves and our beliefs, I want to share with you some of that which is already written and adopted by our church globally, which comprises 44,000 churches and over 10 million members. Did you know you were part of such a big body of faith? So this morning we began with our call to care for the natural world. And for me, that's a perfect introduction. Let's start at the beginning, the book of Genesis. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and later he created humankind to serve as stewards or caretakers of this creation. I think our relationship to the earth has long been misunderstood and abused for many generations. And I think the quote I read by Henry Nouwen best sums up what a right relationship should be, as he wrote in his book, Bread for the Journey. He said, "How do we live in creation? Do we relate to it as a place full of things that we can use for whatever we need for whatever need we want to fulfill and whatever goal we wish to accomplish? Do we relate to creation as a place full of things? Or do we see creation first of all as a sacramental reality, a sacred space where God reveals to us the immense beauty of the divine? I know last Sunday evening as we sat out at Rocky Mountain National Park, I felt that sense of the divine, of the beauty of nature as we looked out into the snow-covered peaks and were surrounded by forest, even a little bunny hopping through our worship service. God just refuses to be ignored. Creation refuses to be ignored. And I think if we actually began to see our environment and the created world as a sacramental reality, then we might soften or reframe the way that we think about our stewardship of the planet. In our social principles, the introduction to this first part, which is written sort of like a constitution, it has a historical description, it has a preface and a preamble, and then it goes into the 6 sections. This first section says, all creation is the Lord's, and we are responsible for the ways in which we use and abuse it. Water, air, soil, minerals, energy resources, plants, animal life, and space are to be valued and conserved because they are God's creation, and not solely because they are useful to human beings. God has granted us stewardship of creation. We should meet these stewardship duties through acts of loving care and respect. Economic, political, social, and technological developments have increased our human numbers and lengthened and enriched our lives. However, these developments have led to regional defoliation, dramatic extinction of species, massive human suffering, overpopulation, and misuse and overconsumption of natural and non-renewable resources, particularly by industrialized societies. This continued course of action jeopardizes the natural heritage that God has entrusted to all generations. Therefore, let us recognize the responsibility of the church and its members to place a high priority on changes in economic, political, social, and technological lifestyles to support a more ecologically equitable and sustainable world, leading to a higher quality of life for all of God's creation. That's just the introduction. It goes on for pages and pages after that, breaking down in detail what some people have penned about global climate stewardship, about food justice, about science and technology and how we should embrace mystery and new developments, and even about how we can work to eradicate hunger. As I look to today's Psalm, Psalm 8, I see that the psalmist claims if we look up at the moon and the stars, we can be filled with divine awareness. How deep is God's love? How great is the God of creation? And I wonder if that's true. I wonder if taking notice of the beauty around us helps us to understand our place in the natural world and creates in us a passion to take better care of it. I'm not sure, because if we look towards our human relationships, I think we may often find ourselves taking for granted more often than we find ourselves giving thanks for the abundance of our blessings. It's easy to focus on what we don't have and on the shortcomings and on the problems, rather than to stand in awe and wonder at the beauty and the majesty of creation. I invite you to take a look around this morning. Take a look at the people sitting next to you. Take a look at this building where we sit, this town where we live, this time and space in which we exist. John Wesley wrote, God is in all things, and we are to see the Creator in the face of every creature. We should use and look upon nothing as separate from God, which is indeed a kind of practical atheism. If you look in our world today, you can see atheism on the rise. You can see prayer being taken out of schools. You can see religion being taken out of families. Sometimes we feel like we're fighting an uphill battle. But I think that the key is to focus on the foundation of truth, which is this: there is nothing that separates us from one another, or from our environment, or from our Creator. And we as Christians need to hold on to that truth and share that word of hope with the world around us. I think our perspective makes a big difference, whether we see ourselves as separate, individualistic, and separated from God and others, or whether we see ourselves as being encompassed by the great and loving care of a loving and heavenly Creator. I know that talking about the environment can sound a little bit like a 1960s hippie tree hugger. And so thank you for your patience as I discuss this topic this morning. And for those of you that look at our Facebook page, you will have seen a picture this week that I found. It said tree hugger in parentheses, and on top, the cross. Jesus was the first tree hugger, the ultimate tree hugger. And following his example, we're called to do the same, to care for creation. Even the Catholics agree. Pope John Paul II reminded us why we should care for the environment when he said, "Through your closeness to the land, you touch the sacredness of human relationship with God." It almost sounds Native American in its background. Through your closeness with the land, you touch the sacredness of human relationship with God. I pray that we may each touch and be touched this morning by the sacredness of our relationships. And as we move into the sacrament of Holy Communion, I hope that we can celebrate our oneness, unity with God, unity with the natural world, and unity with one another through Jesus Christ, who calls us into union. Amen.
Amen.